The scent of leather and aged books lingered in the federal courthouse as I sat across from District Judge Jaime, presenting him with proof of HOA corruption. Suddenly, my phone vibrated, an alert that sent a chill through me. On the screen was a live feed. Brenda Thornwick, our HOA president, forcing her way into my lake cabin just 200 meters away. Through the phone speaker, I could hear wood splintering as she kicked down the back door. Judge Jaime leaned closer, eyes narrowing. "Is this happening right now?" he asked out. Brenda had no clue that federal agents were already positioned around my property. She didn't realize the judge himself was witnessing her break-in, live. And she certainly didn't know her years-long campaign of intimidation against military families was about to earn her a federal prison sentence. The truth is, when you target the wrong veteran's home at the exact moment he's meeting a federal judge about your crimes, well, that's what we call impeccable timing. So tell me, what would you do if your HOA president broke into your house while you were building a federal case against them? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I have a feeling some of you have faced HOA bullies too. My name is Marcus Kelly. Just 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my own paradise. After 30 years in telecommunications engineering and a comfortable payout from patents I'd developed, I took early retirement to restore my grandfather's old lake cabin in Pine Lake, Montana. Our family had owned it since 1967. Its weathered cedar siding, hand-built stone fireplace, and dock stretching into crystal water where trout swam 20 feet below it was everything I dreamed of. Mornings were pure magic there, coffee steaming as loons called across the still lake, the dock creaking beneath my boots, peace in its truest form. My wife Sarah envisioned turning it into a retreat for veterans. And our teenage daughter Emma claimed the loft bedroom with its perfect lake view. And then came Brenda Thornwick. Imagine a woman who wields a leather binder like a weapon and drives a spotless white SUV that looks brand new every single day. Brenda had ruled as HOA president for 6 years, ran a real estate office, and carried an air of constant disapproval carved into her sharp features. When she first introduced herself, the scent of her high-end perfume clashed with the fresh pine air, as if even the outdoors felt less authentic in her presence. "Welcome to Pine Lake," she said. Though her voice implied I wasn't especially welcome, "I trust you'll get acquainted with our community standards." Community standards, that should have been my first warning. 3 weeks later, I got my real introduction to Brenda's definition of standards. A certified letter arrived, the thick paper feeling unnecessarily official in my hands. Inside, a $1,500 fine for unauthorized structure modifications, the so-called violation. My grandfather's dock extension constructed back in 1972. When we reviewed recent satellite imagery, we identified non-compliant structures on your lot. Brenda told me when I called. I could hear the steady tap of her polished nails against her desk. All shoreline modifications must receive current HOA approval. That's what made the whole thing absurd. The HOA didn't even exist until 1985, 13 years after my grandfather had already built the dock. I had every piece of proof you could imagine, the original permits, the surveys, even photographs of him and my father fishing from it when I was 10. Logic would suggest presenting that kind of documentation should clear everything up, but no. At the next HOA meeting, I arrived fully prepared. The community center reeked of burnt coffee and waxed linoleum. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead while about 15 residents sat on folding chairs. I spread out the evidence, photos, permits. A clear timeline showing the dock was legally grandfathered. Brenda barely skimmed it before announcing, in the same casual tone someone might use to report the weather, "Grandfathered structures require annual compliance fees, $500 a month, for historical maintenance assessments." That meant $6,000 a year for a dock that had been perfectly legal since day one. That's when I began noticing a disturbing trend. During the meeting, I overheard hushed exchanges between neighbors, their whispers dying instantly whenever Brenda turned in their direction. One older woman, Gladys, quietly confided that she'd seen similar harassment aimed at other military families. Afterward, I dug deeper. It turned out 3 veteran families had been hit with escalating fines in just the past 2 years. 2 of them had ended up selling their homes, both sales conveniently handled through Brenda's real estate business. Sitting in my truck afterward, the smell of diesel from the lot lingering in the air, my suspicion hardened. This had nothing to do with DOT compliance or community standards. This was about targeting veterans. Here's the truth I wish I'd recognized earlier: when an HOA suddenly starts finding violations only on properties owned by certain groups, it isn't bureaucracy, it's discrimination. And discrimination against veterans isn't just unethical, it can cross into federal crime. But I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. 2 weeks later, Brenda escalated. She appeared at my cabin without warning on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand, trailed by a man she introduced as Dale, allegedly a county inspector. I caught the sour mix of stale cigarette smoke and cheap aftershave before they even reached the porch. Dale looked miserable, shifting nervously and sneaking glances at Brenda as if waiting for her cue. His inspector badge hung crooked on a shirt that looked to decades past respectable. Routine safety inspection, Brenda declared as she brushed past me without so much as asking to enter. We've had multiple complaints about electrical hazards near the shoreline. Complaints? From who? I asked. I was the only person even using the cabin. I trailed behind them as they circled my cabin, watching Dale point out perfectly legal GFCI outlets, the exact kind built for outdoor installation near water. Each time he hesitated, Brenda would clear her throat and tap her pen against that ever-present leather folder. The sharp, metallic click set my nerves on edge. This outlet's far too close to the shoreline, Dale muttered, snapping a picture of one that sat a good 15 feet from the water and fully up to code. I knew because I had installed it myself, drawing on my electrical engineering background. And this fire pit? Brenda added with exaggerated alarm, motioning toward my grandfather's old stone circle. Seems entirely unpermitted. I nearly laughed out loud. Unpermitted? It was nothing more than a ring of field stones my grandfather had arranged by hand back in the 1960s. I had photographs spanning 3 generations of my family roasting marshmallows around those very rocks, but Brenda couldn't care less about heritage. The list of so-called violations grew like a spreading infection. $1,500 for electrical noncompliance, $1,200 for an unapproved recreational fire feature, $1,500 for not maintaining adequate waterfront safety standards, plus a $300 recurring monthly fee for compliance monitoring, altogether $4,200 upfront, with $300 draining away every month afterward. That night, I barely slept. The unfairness churned in my stomach like bad diner coffee. So, I did what any retired telecom engineer would do. I started digging. Montana law requires building inspectors to hold state certification, with licenses easily searchable online through the Department of Labor. I searched for Dale's name. Nothing. But then Dale Morrison, listed as a real estate agent with Thornwick Properties, found him. My father always told me, when someone's trying to cheat you, they usually slip up somewhere. He was right. Fake inspectors leave digital traces like everyone else. I'd learned the hard way. Working with contractors, always verify credentials before letting anyone claim authority over your property. By Wednesday morning, I had filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board, and from that point on, I adjusted my strategy. Every exchange with Brenda would happen in writing, strictly email. No more phone calls. She could later twist or deny. But Brenda wasn't done. Her campaign only intensified. Within days, anonymous noise complaints started piling up about perfectly legal restoration work I was doing between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. New parking restrictions appeared overnight, with signs suspiciously positioned to make access to my cabin harder. The sharp click of Brenda's heels on the pavement became my unofficial warning bell. She'd prowl the neighborhood like a prison guard, always clutching that leather folder, always snapping photos of something. That was the moment I made the decision that changed everything: installing security cameras. I set up a discreet system that covered my driveway, the dock, and the common areas Brenda favored for her little surveillance routines. The first week of recordings was like opening presents on Christmas morning. There she was, Brenda, out at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, tape measure in hand while Dale held a flashlight. They snapped photos from every angle. clearly building a case for more bogus violations. But what truly chilled me was this: they weren't just targeting my property. The footage showed them conducting the same midnight inspections at 3 other homes, all owned by veterans. After 2 weeks of reviewing footage, the pattern was undeniable. Brenda's spotless white SUV appeared like clockwork at the driveways of military families. She would measure, photograph, and document, always under cover of darkness, confident no one would ever see. The smoking gun came from a particularly clear audio recording. In my driveway, just past midnight, Brenda stood with her phone to her ear. "The Kelly property should be simple," she said. "These military types always buckle under sustained pressure. A few more violations and he'll be desperate to sell below market." When she finally pulled away, the lingering diesel smell from her SUV no longer just reeked of fuel, it reeked of evidence. I now had hard proof of systematic harassment, fraudulent inspections, and deliberate discrimination against veterans. It was time to flip the script. With evidence of Brenda's midnight surveillance campaign in hand, I thought I had finally cornered her. I was wrong. Instead of retreating, she escalated with legal intimidation. A certified letter arrived on heavy, embossed law firm stationery designed to rattle your nerves the moment you touched it. Across the top, in bold letters that practically shouted off the page, "Cease and desist all unauthorized activities." The message was unmistakable: pay $7,800 in fines within 30 days or face a lien on my property. According to them, the original violations had ballooned with daily penalties, and new charges had been tacked on for so-called continuing noncompliance and failure to respond to HOA communications. Sitting at my kitchen table, I read it twice. The paper reeked of fresh ink and intimidation tactics, but something about it didn't sit right. The law firm Hartwell and Associates was listed with a Helena address, yet when I searched online, their website looked like it had been built in 2003 and left to rot. That afternoon, I drove to the county courthouse, a limestone building that carried the stale smell of bureaucracy and decades of floor wax. My years wrangling with city permits had taught me one thing: legitimate legal actions always leave a paper trail. Down in the dusty basement records room, I found exactly what I was after: the original HOA formation documents from 1985. As I snapped photos of one file after another with my phone, the dusty smell of old paper tickling my nose and making me sneeze, I stumbled onto something revealing. The current CC enters the covenants, conditions, and restrictions Brenda leaned on for her authority looked very different from the original documents. Over the years, substantial amendments had been slipped in, including the so-called historical structure assessment that was draining me for $500 every month. But then I found the detail that made my pulse race. Those amendments legally required approval from 75% of homeowners. I dug up meeting minutes, voting tallies, even proxy records. Again and again, Brenda's rule changes had passed with slim margins, sometimes with less than half the community even present. My grandfather, a builder by trade, had drilled into me the importance of reading contracts line by line. "The devil hides in the details," he used to say, "and the truth lives in the signatures." He was right. Rule changes pushed through without proper approval in federal court, they were nothing more than expensive scrap paper. But my digging was about to expose something far more serious. I began contacting the veteran families who had been forced to sell under Brenda's harassment campaigns. Pete Michaels, a Desert Storm veteran, agreed to meet me over coffee in a greasy diner that smelled of bacon and old fryer oil. He told me his story. "Same playbook," Pete said, his voice heavy. "First came dock violations, then electrical complaints. Next thing I knew, I owed $12,000 in fines for a shed my father-in-law built back in '92. His voice cracked as he admitted, "I sold for $180,000 just to escape the legal bills." 3 months later, Brenda's company flipped the place for $320,000. The scheme was becoming undeniable. Target a veteran family, invent violations, pile on fines until financial pressure forced a below-market sale, resell through Brenda's real estate office for a hefty profit. I filed formal complaints with the State Real Estate Commission, documenting the blatant conflict of interest between Brenda's HOA authority and her property flipping business. But Brenda wasn't waiting for regulators to catch up. One morning my mailbox was spray-painted in blood-red letters, "Troublemaker." Anonymous notes started appearing under my windshield wipers. "Military types don't belong in family neighborhoods." Some people never learn when they're not wanted. The intimidation campaign was working on my family. Emma asked if we could move back to town. Sarah jumped at every car door that slammed outside. What was supposed to be our peaceful retreat had turned into a battlefield. And then came the final escalation. While I was in town picking up supplies, my security system sent an alert. Reviewing the footage, I saw Brenda's white SUV idling at the far end of our street, engine running like a getaway car. Someone moved toward my back door. The camera didn't catch a clear face, but the fresh gouger on the lock and scattered gravel told the story. They had tried to break in. That night, watching the recording with Sarah, we both noticed the same chilling detail. The attempt happened during the exact window Brenda knew I would be away. Information she could only have gathered by closely tracking my routine. "This isn't about money anymore," Sarah whispered. "This is personal." She was right. But what Brenda didn't know was that her escalating harassment had caught the attention of someone with real power to stop her. 3 days after the attempted break-in, Brenda played her nuclear option. A notice appeared in every mailbox around Pine Lake, cheap paper with smudged ink that betrayed the rushed, desperate nature of her plan. Emergency HOA meeting addressing disruptive residents threatening community safety. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. Middle of a workday when most reasonable people would be at their jobs. The agenda was buried in legal jargon, but the message was clear. They wanted to vote on foreclosing my property for a pattern of violations endangering community welfare. I spent Tuesday night reaching out to every neighbor I could trust, making discreet phone calls after Sarah and Emma went to bed. The whispered conversations painted a disturbing picture. Gladys, the elderly woman who lived 2 doors down, revealed something that made my stomach drop. My Harold, God rest his soul, went through the same thing before he passed, she said, her voice trembling over the phone. Korean War veteran, decorated soldier. They said his workshop violated noise ordinances, claimed his American flag was too big for community standards, and stressed. She couldn't finish the sentence. Harold had died of a heart attack 6 months into his fight with Brenda. Thursday arrived with the kind of gray Montana sky that feels heavy with approaching storms. The community center tires of industrial disinfectant and stale coffee, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Folding chairs were arranged to minimize seating, a deliberate attempt to keep attendance low. 12 people showed up out of 40 homeowners. Brenda had stacked the deck with her allies, Dale, 2 real estate agents from her office, and several residents who'd received mysterious reductions in their own HOA fines the week before. "Thank you all for coming to address this serious matter," Brenda began, standing behind a podium like she was delivering a sermon. Her presentation slides looked professional, too professional for an emergency community meeting. She'd prepared a whole show. Aerial photos of my property with red circles around alleged violations, charts showing declining property values in our section, and testimonials from concerned residents about my aggressive behavior and disruptive construction activities. But the most damaging slide made my blood boil. It showed a photo of me in my army dress uniform from Emma's school career day overlaid with text reading military training assets or liability in family communities. The implication was crystal clear. Veterans were inherently dangerous. Studies indicate that veterans often struggle to reintegrate into civilian life, Brenda went on, her voice dripping with a tone that sounded sympathetic on the surface but carried an undercurrent of condescension. "While we respect their service, the safety and stability of our families must come first." I sat quietly in the back row, my phone legally recording under Montana's one-party consent law something that was about to prove invaluable. Every biased remark, every invented accusation, every infringement on my civil rights was being preserved as evidence. When Brenda opened the floor for community comments, 3 neighbors rose to speak on my behalf. Tom Rivera, a retired schoolteacher, reminded everyone that I'd repaired his dock after the spring floods. Margaret Jaime mentioned my volunteer work with the local VFW. Even timid Mrs. Patterson found the courage to say that my restoration efforts were adding beauty to the lakefront. But Brenda had come prepared for opposition. From her ever-present folder, she pulled out a stack of typed witness statements. They alleged that I had threatened board members, disturbed the peace with power tools at odd hours, and made suspicious property changes that supposedly endangered neighbors. I spotted Dale's signature on 2 of them, while the rest bore the names of people who'd mysteriously received reduced fines. If we fail to act decisively, Brenda warned, her voice climbing into what sounded like carefully rehearsed hysteria, other homeowners will sue us for neglecting community standards. Property values will crash. Families will be driven out. The outcome was already scripted. My vote was disqualified since I was under enforcement action. Abstentions were tallied as votes in favor of foreclosure. And the process was rushed through before anyone could object. Final tally 8 in favor of foreclosure, 4 against, but Brenda had overlooked one crucial detail. My phone was still recording, and during a recess believing the device had been shut off, she leaned toward Dale and whispered words that would change everything. Military families drag neighborhoods down. Everybody knows it. Once we clear out the Kellys and the Martinez family, we can rebrand this place as an upscale family community. No more PTSD cases or people living off government checks. When the vote concluded, the room fell into an uneasy silence, the kind of heavy pause that hangs just before a thunderclap. I rose slowly, phone still in hand. "Thank you all for your time," I said evenly. "I'll be appealing this decision through the proper legal channels. But I want to make one thing clear: discrimination against veterans is a federal crime. And everything that was said here today is now part of an official record." Brenda's face drained of color, but just as quickly, she forced her composure back into place. "Empty threats won't overturn a lawful vote, Mr. Kelly." As I moved toward the exit, Harold's widow, Gladys, slipped a folded note into my palm. Her handwriting trembled across the page, a phone number and 5 simple words: "Call him. He can help." That number led me to the most pivotal conversation of my life. "Marcus, this is Judge William Jaime. Gladys said you might reach out." I almost dropped my coffee mug. The quiet widow had just connected me with a federal district judge, her own son-in-law. "Judge, I'm grateful for your time, but I don't know if this situation really rises to the federal level." "Stop right there," he cut me off, his voice carrying the steady authority of a man long accustomed to command. "I've been tracking HOA discrimination patterns across Montana for the past year and a half. Your case isn't an exception, Mr. Kelly. It's a piece of a much larger puzzle." That Friday, I found myself seated in Judge Jaime's chambers in Helena. Sunlight poured through towering windows, casting shadows across a desk piled with files stamped "Confidential." The room carried the unmistakable gravity of true justice. 23 HOA letters across Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, he explained, unrolling a map studded with red pins, each showing the same blueprint: veterans targeted, violations fabricated, fines inflated, properties forced into below-market sales. The tactics are identical. My hands shook as he revealed federal subpoenas already issued for financial records tied to Thornwick Properties and nearly 24 other outfits. The scale was overwhelming. Hundreds of veteran families systematically stripped of their homes. "The unique thing about your case, Marcus, is the timing," the judge said, fixing his eyes on me. "We've been assembling evidence for months, but we need someone still in the fight, someone with proof and the courage to wear a wire. A wire, witness protection, RICO charges." Legal terms spun through my mind like debris in a storm, but one truth cut through the whirlwind: I hadn't been paranoid. This wasn't petty HOA red tape, it was organized crime. Brenda's network has generated roughly $2.3 million from forced veteran property sales in just 3 years, Jaime continued, tapping a stack of financial records that made my stomach twist. "And these email chains between her and associates in 6 states leave no doubt. They discuss removing military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics." The smoking gun was a thread labeled Operation Clean Sweep. It read less like HOA correspondence and more like something torn straight from a segregationist handbook of the 1950s. Brenda and her circle had built a methodical strategy for driving veteran families out. They would identify military backgrounds through public records, send in bogus inspectors to fabricate violations, crank up the pressure with compounding fines, and finally swoop in with cut-rate purchase offers hidden behind shell companies. Your nighttime surveillance footage was the missing link, Judge Jaime told me, paired with the discriminatory remarks you captured at yesterday's meeting. We now have grounds for federal civil rights charges, mail fraud, and a RICO conspiracy case. What made my pulse quicken was what came next. They wanted me to stay in the open, keep up appearances, continue looking like I was on the ropes. Let Brenda believe she's breaking you. Jaime explained, the more she pushes, the more evidence she'll hand us. He slid a business card across the desk. John Morrison, Assistant U.S. Attorney. Call her Monday. She'll walk you through witness protection and what we'll need from you in the coming weeks. Driving back toward Pine Lake, I saw the Montana landscape differently. Those mountains weren't just majestic anymore, they were sheltering a federal investigation spanning 3 states. The scattered ranches and towns weren't just communities. They were now case files in an operation that could redefine how HOAs function across the country. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. How did it go? For the first time in months, I smiled. Better than expected. Much better. That night, with loons calling across the lake and Emma strumming her guitar in the loft, I sat on my grandfather's dock as the sunset spilled gold and crimson across the water. The very dock Brenda had tried to bankrupt me over. Tomorrow I'd put on the act, weary, defeated, ready to cave. But tonight, I was simply a veteran who had found allies powerful enough to strike back against systemic discrimination. The federal government was about to remind Brenda Thornwick that some battles rise far above HOA bylaws. By Monday morning, stepping into the hell in a federal building felt like entering another world. Marble corridors echoed with the steady steps of people carrying serious responsibilities. The smell of strong government coffee mixing with the weight of federal authority. Assistant U.S. Attorney John Morrison looked every bit the part, someone who could dismantle a tax fraud case and still have the stamina to run a marathon. Her walls were lined with commendations, photos alongside senators, and a framed headline, Federal Prosecutor Cracks Massive Insurance Fraud Ring. Mr. Kelly, she began, sliding a thick folder toward me, you're about to play a central role in the largest HOA corruption case in U.S. history. Stamped across the cover, Operation Clean Sweep, their own name churned against them. 47 defendants across 6 states. The scale was staggering. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been following real estate laundering schemes for 8 months. Civil rights investigators were documenting patterns of discrimination against protected groups. Even the IRS was pursuing unreported profits from forced property sales. Your part is critical, Morrison said. We need Brenda to escalate while our surveillance captures every move. Think of yourself as bait inside a very carefully laid trap. The technical setup felt straight out of an espionage thriller. FBI electronics experts equipped me with a recording device so tiny it could have passed for a shirt button. Hidden cameras were mounted around my property by a staged utility crew, so well concealed that even I couldn't find them once installed. Agent Sarah Kim from the Financial Crimes Division walked me through Brenda's financial trail. Bank records revealed a clear, deliberate pattern: HOA fines funneled through shell corporations, properties acquired via LLCs, and profits laundered through layers of real estate deals. She's been meticulous, but not meticulous enough, Kim said, pointing to spreadsheets that screamed organized crime. The same LLC charging you fines also owns the company trying to buy your home below market value. That's classic racketeering. My assignment sounded simple on paper: play the role of a desperate homeowner fighting foreclosure, while federal investigators documented the rest. Every word exchanged with Brenda would be recorded. Every act of harassment would be logged by surveillance teams. Every dollar would be traced through federal banking channels. But I wasn't standing alone anymore. Gladys had quietly built a network of support much wider than I ever imagined. Harold's fellow veterans from 3 different wars had been watching, waiting, and gathering evidence against Brenda with the precision of soldiers on long deployment. Vietnam vet Chuck Martinez had kept detailed logs of suspicious HOA actions for 2 years. Korea veteran Bill Patterson had used night vision gear from his security business to capture photos of Brenda's late-night prowling. Even Desert Storm veteran Linda Foster had been secretly recording HOA meetings on a device her son set up for her. "We've all been waiting for someone willing to fight in the open," Chuck told me over dinner, the smell of his wife's enchiladas heavy in the air as he slid a notebook across the table. "Harold fought them alone until the end. You won't have to." The legal plan was as sharp as it was complex. RICO charges would dismantle Brenda's entire network and open the door for the feds to seize every asset gained through fraud. Civil rights violations carried mandatory minimums that could lock conspirators away for years. And the use of the U.S. mail for intimidating letters and fabricated fines added another layer of federal jurisdiction through mail fraud statutes. Morrison had emphasized one critical point during our meeting: under federal law, veterans are a protected class in housing discrimination cases. That meant every time Brenda targeted a military family with harassment, she wasn't just overstepping HOA authority, she was committing a federal crime. "Here's what most people fail to grasp about fighting HOA letters," Morrison said, reclining in her chair with the calm assurance of someone used to taking down real criminals. "The moment they cross into civil rights violations, their legal shield vanishes. Discriminatory enforcement against veterans isn't just improper, it's a federal crime. Full stop." The technical evidence-gathering operation was already bearing fruit. Forensic accountants had traced more than $400,000 from forced veteran property sales directly into Brenda's personal bank accounts. Digital forensics experts had recovered damning emails, messages openly discussing removing military problems from servers Brenda believed were untouchable. Even local authorities were in sync with the feds. Sheriff Martinez, unrelated to Chuck, had been quietly compiling harassment complaints for months, creating a record that prosecutors could use to prove systematic abuse of power. My cabin had effectively become the hub of a federal investigation, staffed by dozens of agents, prosecutors, and specialists. Motion detectors covered every approach to the property. Long-range recording gear captured conversations from hundreds of feet away. And rapid response teams stood ready in case Brenda's harassment turned violent. But the key factor was timing. Prosecutors needed Brenda to escalate to cross bright legal lines while still believing federal authorities weren't involved. "Let her think she's winning," Morrison advised. "Desperation breeds mistakes. And mistakes make evidence. All we have to do is give her enough rope." Pretending to be the broken, outmatched homeowner was far tougher than I'd imagined. Every instinct in me wanted to push back when she intensified her harassment. But the government needed her to incriminate herself. While the surveillance net recorded everything, the first real escalation came late on a Tuesday night. Around 11 p.m. I was sitting in my kitchen reviewing case files when the lights flickered and went out. Not just my cabin, but the entire far end of the lake went dark. Backup emergency lighting kicked on, casting jagged shadows across the room. By morning, the truth was clear. The main power line feeding for veteran-owned homes had been deliberately cut. The precision was unmistakable. This wasn't random vandalism, but calculated sabotage, staged to mimic equipment failure. The utility company's repair bill nearly stopped my heart. $1,200 for emergency service, plus another $800 for safety upgrades required after tampering. But what enraged me most was this: Brenda's house, only 50 yards away, never lost electricity, and the surveillance cameras had caught everything in crisp detail daily at 2:17 a.m. Wire cutters in hand at the utility pole, while Brenda's white SUV idled nearby with its headlights off. The recordings even captured Brenda instructing Dale to stage the damage so it would look like aging equipment failure. Later that afternoon, Agent Kim called. From the FBI's perspective, it was a goldmine: sabotage disguised as infrastructure issues, aimed squarely at military households. Legally, it crossed an even sharper line: destruction of federal property, since the utility grid tied into interstate commerce. But Brenda wasn't done with her infrastructure games. 3 days later, I woke in the middle of the night to the roar of water outside. A geyser had erupted by my foundation exactly where Dale had been inspecting the week before. supposedly checking for easement violations. The emergency plumber showed up at dawn, his boots sinking into mud that reeked of wet earth and dread. "Odd situation," he muttered, studying the pipe. "Looks like somebody struck it with a pickaxe, but they knew exactly where to hit. The spot that makes repairs costliest." The bill confirmed it, $1,200 for emergency service. $800 more for excavation and replacement, plus temporary water fees. The financial squeeze was playing out exactly as Brenda intended, except every act of sabotage was being meticulously documented by federal surveillance teams. The kind of airtight evidence prosecutors dream of presenting. Meanwhile, her psychological warfare escalated. Anonymous flyers appeared around the neighborhood, plastered with grainy pictures of me and bold text asking, "Do you feel safe with unstable veterans in our community?" The cheap paper and streaky ink made it obvious they'd been rushed out during late-night print runs. My mailbox was defaced twice more, first with "Troublemaker" in red spray paint, then "Go Home" scrawled in handwriting that looked suspiciously like Dale's. Federal document examiners were already comparing it with his bogus inspection reports. Smear campaigns spread onto social media next. Fake accounts with stock photo avatars pushed lies about my aggressive outbursts at meetings, my suspicious midnight activities, and even my supposed instability due to military service. But the most unsettling escalation was the business pressure campaign. Through her real estate network, Brenda began warning local contractors against working with me, calling me a difficult client who might refuse to pay or drag them into lawsuits. To suppliers, abruptly demanded cash only, cutting off my credit. Even the owner of the hardware store, Vietnam vet himself, quietly admitted someone had been digging into my purchase history. The federal countermeasures were immediate, though invisible. FBI financial crime investigators traced the fraudulent social media accounts to their origins. Civil rights enforcers documented how Brenda's contractor blacklisting and supplier interference amounted to targeted economic harassment of veterans. Even the U.S. Postal Service joined in, since the flyers and mailbox intimidation fell under federal mail fraud statutes. Agent Kim's updates kept me sane during those weeks. "She's ticking off every box in the racketeering handbook," she told me. Conspiracy, civil rights violations, property destruction, mail fraud, even wire fraud for the social media attacks. Honestly, law schools could use her behavior as a case study in what not to do. Still, the toll on my family was undeniable. The harassment might have been building the government's case, but it was also grinding us down, day by day. Emma began waking from nightmares about intruders breaking into our cabin. Sarah startled at every slam of a car door outside. The retreat we had dreamed of had turned into a battlefield, with federal agents the only barrier between us and Brenda's escalating campaign of harassment. The most chilling discovery came after a night we spent in town visiting Sarah's parents. When we returned, I found fresh footprints circling the cabin, muddy tracks pressed into the soil around doors and windows, proof that someone had been casing the property. Agents later showed me photos, Brenda herself, prowling the perimeter under cover of darkness, conducting reconnaissance for what prosecutors believed was her last desperate move. The endgame began with a federal wiretap. On Thursday evening, Agent Kim called me on a secure line, her voice edged with anticipation. She played back the intercepted call. "We need undeniable proof of his instability," Brenda's voice crackled through the speaker. "Something that convinces everyone he's a danger to the community. Then we can push for emergency removal." Dale's reply came hesitant, almost trembling. "What kind of proof?" "The kind that gets judges signing restraining orders and forces immediate property sales," Brenda snapped. It was the evidence prosecutors had been waiting months to catch, a conspiracy to fabricate evidence. Morrison's team wasted no time seeking authorization for what they termed controlled criminal activity documentation. Translation: let Brenda commit the crimes, while recording every detail. My role was simple: keep up the illusion of being vulnerable. I made sure the neighborhood gossips overheard me tell Sarah I'd be in Helena for legal consultations that weekend. In truth, I would be meeting with prosecutors, while surveillance teams lay in wait around my cabin. Friday afternoon, I staged the performance, loading an overnight bag into my truck, telling Tom Rivera within earshot that I'd be gone until Sunday. "Tom, who had quietly been feeding information to federal agents, wished me luck with my supposed attorney meetings. The drive to Helena felt unreal. Montana's late autumn mountains gleamed gold and copper beneath the wide sky, while agents tracked every approach to my cabin from 200 meters away. On my phone, the live security feed showed the lake lying minutes away from becoming the backdrop to a federal sting. Saturday morning, I sat in Judge Jaime's chambers, watching the operation unfold in real time on a secure monitor. At 11:47 a.m., Brenda's white SUV appeared on camera, slipping behind a line of pine trees where she thought she was concealed. 15 minutes later, Dale's pickup rolled up, loaded with tools and equipment. "She's been setting this up for weeks," Agent Kim whispered, fine-tuning the audio feed. "We've got wiretaps of her buying fake drug paraphernalia and printing extremist propaganda to plant." The break-in played out like a crime drama. Dale approached my back door with professional lockpicks while Brenda acted as lookout, her eyes darting up and down the street. The cameras caught every nuance: Dale's nervous sweating, Brenda's sharp hand gestures, the deliberate way they avoided touching door handles. Judge Jaime leaned forward as Dale finally forced the lock. 30 years on the bench," he murmured, "and I've never seen criminals create evidence for their own prosecution in real time." Inside, the surveillance feeds showed them working with grim efficiency. Brenda tucked fake extremist pamphlets into my bedroom dresser. Dale placed counterfeit drug paraphernalia in my workshop. Together, they planted forged documents suggesting I'd threatened HOA board members. But their fatal mistake wasn't the staging, it was what they said while doing it. "Once we photograph all this tomorrow," Brenda whispered, completely unaware federal microphones were recording, "the restraining order will go through and the property will be seized. The Martinez family will see what happens to troublemakers and they'll take our offer without a fight." Dale's answer sealed their fate. "What about the other veterans, the ones who haven't pushed back yet?" Dale asked nervously. "Same treatment," Brenda answered without hesitation. "Military families don't belong in residential neighborhoods. We're doing a service cleaning up communities, one property at a time." Federal surveillance caught every word in crystal clear audio and video. Irrefutable proof of a civil rights conspiracy. The takedown came just as they finished planting their staged evidence. FBI agents closed in with precision, surrounding my cabin as Brenda and Dale stepped out the back door carrying their tools. Agent Kim's voice crackled through my phone, barely hiding her excitement. "Perfect. We've got them for breaking and entering, conspiracy to violate civil rights, tampering with evidence, and at least half a dozen other federal charges. Plus, everything points to organized racketeering across state lines." Judge Jaime, watching the live arrest feed with me, leaned forward. His expression carried both satisfaction and the weight of decades on the bench. "Mr. Kelly, this is one of the clearest cases of civil rights conspiracy I've seen in 30 years. But the story was only beginning." During the arrest, federal agents seized Brenda's phone and with it, uncovered a web of operations spanning 6 states. Bank records showed money laundering through layers of real estate transactions. Email servers contained incriminating correspondence detailing the systematic targeting of military families. Going back 5 years, Dale folded within hours. Facing the reality of federal prison, he agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for leniency. His testimony widened the scope of the case: 43 HOA letters employing the same tactics, more than 200 veteran families driven from their homes, and millions laundered through shell corporations. The next day brought the spotlight. The media swarmed, neighbors whispered, and the first wave of reckoning began. On the steps of the Helena Federal Courthouse, news vans jammed the street. Satellite dishes pointed skyward against the crisp November air. The scent of exhaust from idling engines mixed with the mountain breeze as crews from CNN, Fox News, and all 3 major networks prepared to cover what U.S. Attorney Morrison called it a landmark moment in civil rights enforcement. I stood beside Judge Jaime, still trying to process the fact that less than 2 days earlier, I'd been nothing more than a homeowner under siege from an HOA. I now stood as the central witness in what prosecutors were calling the largest coordinated housing discrimination case in U.S. history. Morrison stepped to the podium with the poise of someone who had spent months assembling an unshakable case. Just behind her, Agent Kim carried a thick binder packed with evidence that promised to reshape how HOA letters function nationwide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, her voice ringing across the courthouse steps. "Today we announce a 47-count federal indictment against Brenda Thornwick and 12 co-conspirators. Charges include systematic civil rights violations, racketeering, and conspiracy to defraud military families of their constitutional right to housing." The plaza erupted. Reporters shouted over each other. Cameras flared like lightning against the courthouse's granite walls. But Morrison wasn't finished. Operation Clean Sweep has uncovered a criminal enterprise spanning 6 states. Over 200 veteran families were systematically harassed and financially exploited. The defendants reaped roughly $2.30 minus one in illegal profits by forcing below-market property sales through fabricated violations and discriminatory enforcement. Beyond the press swarm, I spotted familiar faces from Pine Lake. Tom Rivera alongside Margaret Jaime, and several neighbors who had quietly supported me all along. Even Gladys stood near the back, her expression fierce with pride as Harold's memory was finally honored. Yet the most satisfying sight wasn't in the crowd at all. It was the federal prisoner transport van parked discreetly at the curb, its darkened windows concealing Brenda during what would be her only appearance. Morrison pressed on with deliberate precision. The evidence includes recorded conversations where defendants openly discussed removing military problems and upgrading neighborhood demographics. We have documented more than 400 fabricated violations, fake inspections by unlicensed personnel, and systemic financial harassment carried out solely because of veteran status. A Washington Post reporter cut through the noise with a pointed question: "What message does this send to other HOA letters engaging in the same practices?" Morrison's smile was razor-sharp. "Federal civil rights law overrides any HOA authority. Discriminatory enforcement based on military service is a federal crime, one with no statute of limitations. Your financial records are traceable, your emails are subject to subpoena, and veterans have allies in very high places." The crowd buzzed with approval, but it was Judge Jaime who delivered the line destined for national headlines. Stepping forward, he spoke with the gravity of 3 decades on the federal bench. "In my years on the court, I have seen civil rights abuses disguised as an administrative process," he said. "This case proves that systemic housing discrimination will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of federal law, no matter how carefully it is hidden or rationalized." A CNN reporter pressed about the larger implications, and Morrison delivered what prosecutors later called the mic drop moment of the entire press conference, directly aimed at HOA boards across the country. "We've identified 847 similar complaints nationwide," she said firmly. "Federal investigators are examining patterns of discriminatory enforcement in 23 states. If you are systematically targeting military families, protected minorities, or anyone based on class membership rather than legitimate rule violations, we will find you, we will prosecute you, and we will seize every asset you gained through unlawful discrimination." The courthouse steps erupted. Cameras burst like fireworks. Reporters shouted follow-up questions, but the thunder of her words was already echoing across the country. Social media exploded with #HOA accountability. Local stations began digging into their own communities' HOA practices. Civil rights attorneys announced reviews of similar cases in state after state. Amid the frenzy, the human cost finally received its due recognition. Pete Michaels, the Desert Storm veteran who'd been forced to sell for $180,000, stood openly crying as Morrison confirmed that restitution would cover his losses plus damages for emotional distress. "Every family that was targeted will receive full compensation," she declared. Federal asset forfeiture has already seized $2.8 million from the defendants' accounts, properties, and business holdings. As the press conference wound down, reporters crowded me, asking how it felt to witness justice. Yet the moment that struck deepest wasn't on camera. A young woman with a military spouse pin approached quietly. "My husband's deployed, and our HOA is threatening us with violations that don't exist," she whispered. "Who do I call?" I pressed Agent Kim's card into her hand. "The federal government is listening now," I told her. "You're not fighting alone anymore. The Montana wind carried those words across the courthouse plaza. Justice, finally loud enough to be heard from coast to coast. 6 months after Brenda's perp walk made national news. Pine Lake looked like the community my grandfather had always dreamed it could be, a place where the smell of barbecue mingled with laughter instead of whispered fear. Brenda was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, burdened with $2.8 million in restitution until her final day. Dale, who cut a deal by testifying, served 3 years and became the government's star witness in cases across 4 states. His cooperation dismantled similar discrimination rings from Idaho to Wyoming, shielding over 400 military families from the abuse we endured. But what mattered most wasn't the headlines, it was watching Emma sleep soundly again, no longer jolted awake by car doors slamming. It was Sarah kneeling in her garden, shoulders no longer tight with fear, her calm finally restored. We had survived a federal case. Yes, but more importantly, we had reclaimed our home. Justice came swiftly and completely. Federal seizures stripped Brenda's empire to the bones, her real estate holdings, her luxury properties, even that pristine white SUV she used for midnight stakeouts. Restitution flowed to every targeted family, including emotional damages. Pete Michaels used his $180,000 recovery to buy a beautiful lakefront cabin, joking that Brenda had unintentionally bought him the retirement home of his dreams. The new HOA board, with me elected unanimously as president, operated with a transparency so clear it could be seen from orbit. Every meeting streamed live. Independent auditors reviewed the books quarterly. And most importantly, we enshrined protections that forbid discrimination of any kind, whether based on military service, race, or background. Property values skyrocketed as national coverage drew families who wanted to live in a place that had stood up for justice. Young military couples chose Pine Lake precisely because they'd heard of our fight. What Brenda tried to poison with hate, we had purified with inclusion. Our healing found its pinnacle with the very first Freedom Day celebration, held every year on the anniversary of Brenda's arrest. Neighbors who once sat on opposite sides of bitter disputes now gathered around long tables, sharing Emma's homemade cookies and trading fishing tales. The joyful laughter of children carried across the same lake where Brenda once stalked the shoreline with her clipboard full of fabricated violations. The heart of the day, though, was the Pine Lake Veteran Scholarship. Built from federal restitution funds and sustained by the love of our community, it provides full college scholarships for children of military families who have faced housing discrimination anywhere in the country. Just last month, I handed a scholarship check to Maria Santos, whose father, an Army veteran, had been forced out of 3 separate neighborhoods before finding refuge with us. Watching her tears of gratitude, I felt as though my grandfather's spirit was smiling down from that old dock. Our case had become more than a local victory, it was a legal precedent that dismantled HOA corruption across America. Federal prosecutors cited our evidence in 43 separate prosecutions. Law schools began teaching our story as the model for civil rights enforcement. Even Netflix released a documentary that exposed millions of viewers to the hidden world of systematic housing discrimination disguised as community standards. The Department of Justice invited me to help draft national HOA oversight legislation, which has already become law in a dozen states. Today, Sarah and I mentor families facing their own HOA battles, connecting them with the federal resources that exist because we refuse to give up. Every call to our hotline feels like another small victory against the Brendas of the world. This morning, I sit once more on my grandfather's restored dock, steam curling from a mug of coffee that tastes like freedom itself. Loons cry across water so clear it reflects every cloud, every possibility. The same dock that nearly cost me everything now hosts community fishing tournaments, where veterans teach neighborhood kids how to cast a line while sharing stories of courage from battlefields far away. The cabin's cedar walls, weathered yet strong, have been transformed into a retreat center where military families come to heal. Surrounded by neighbors who understand that service forges bonds stronger than any HOA rulebook. Even the familiar groan of the old boards under my boots sounds different now. It's no longer the creak of vulnerability, it's the sound of victory. Justice wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. It demanded courage, persistence, and people willing to say enough, but it came delivered with federal badges and the full weight of the Constitution. Your whole nightmare might be more than neighborhood drama, it could be a federal case. Share your story in the comments. You might be shocked at how many laws were broken. And your voice could help another family find justice.